On the edge of a crowded city where traffic never truly slept, Aisha balanced a paper bag of warm bread against her hip and hurried home. Evening shadows stretched long across cracked sidewalks, and shop lights flickered like tired stars. She lived simply, working long hours at a small cafe, saving what she could for her younger brother's school fees. Kindness was the one luxury she never rationed, even when her own days felt heavy. That evening, rain threatened the air, thick and gray. Near the bus stop, she noticed an elderly man sitting quietly beneath a torn awning. His coat was thin, his shoes worn down to their last memory of shine. A cardboard sign rested beside him, not asking for money, only stating that he had served his country long ago. Something in his posture, dignified despite hardship, made Aisha pause. She hesitated only a moment before stepping closer. Without ceremony, she offered the bag of bread and a small container of lentils she had packed for dinner. The man looked up, eyes clear and steady, surprised by the gesture. He thanked her with a voice shaped by years of discipline and restraint. They spoke briefly about the weather, about the city changing faster than memories could keep pace. When the rain finally began, Aisha wished him well and walked away, feeling lighter than she had all day. That night, she dreamed of open fields and calm mornings. The next day at the cafe began like any other, with clinking cups and the low murmur of regulars. Near mid-morning, the door opened, and in walked the same man from the bus stop, freshly groomed, posture straight, expression warm. He asked for tea and took a seat by the window. Aisha served him, puzzled but pleased to see him safe and dry. When he finished his tea, he stood and asked if he might speak with her outside. The request was respectful, measured. On the sidewalk, he introduced himself as Daniel. He explained that he had not been without shelter by fate alone, but by choice, stepping away from a life that had grown too loud. Her kindness, given without question, had reminded him of something essential he had lost. Then, to her astonishment, he asked if she would consider sharing her life with him. Aisha laughed softly, assuming it was a misunderstanding, a misplaced gratitude. Daniel smiled, unoffended. He did not press, only said he hoped to see her again. He left behind a simple card with a name and a number, nothing more. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of thoughts she could not quite organize. Days turned into weeks. Daniel returned often, never demanding, always courteous. They spoke about books, about service, about the meaning of home. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, his words carried the calm assurance of someone who had faced storms and learned how to stand afterward. Aisha found herself waiting for his visits, though she reminded herself to stay grounded. One afternoon, Daniel invited her to walk with him in the public gardens after her shift. The trees were old and generous with shade, the paths lined with quiet benches. He told her about his years in uniform, about leadership learned the hard way, about the cost of ambition. He admitted he had built an empire after his service, then realized too late that success had crowded out compassion. Stepping away had been his attempt to remember who he once was. Aisha listened, heart open but cautious. She spoke of her mother's resilience, her father's absence, her determination to create stability for her brother. Their stories met gently, like two rivers finding a shared course. When they parted that evening, there was a sense of something beginning, fragile and real. The truth revealed itself unexpectedly. One morning, a sleek car waited outside the cafe. Daniel stepped out, dressed simply but unmistakably confident. He asked Aisha to take the day off, assuring her manager everything was arranged. They drove to a glass building that touched the sky. Inside, people greeted Daniel with respect that bordered on reverence. Only then did Aisha understand the scale of the life he had set aside. Daniel explained without flourish. He was the chief executive of a global company, wealth beyond measure, influence spanning continents. He had walked away to test whether the world would still see him without the title. Most had not. Aisha had. Her kindness had been offered to a man, not a position. That was why he had asked, not for gratitude, but for partnership. Aisha felt the ground shift beneath her certainty. She worried about imbalance, about being seen as someone who benefited from fortune rather than character. Daniel acknowledged every fear without defensiveness. He proposed not with spectacle, but with a promise that any life they shared would be built on respect, transparency, and service. He would return to his role, but differently, guided by the values she embodied. She asked for time. Daniel gave it freely. Over the following months, he proved his intentions through actions rather than words. He funded scholarships quietly, improved conditions for workers without announcements, and spent evenings helping Aisha's brother with studies. He learned the rhythm of her life and adapted to it, never asking her to shrink. When Aisha finally accepted, it was not because of wealth or comfort, but because trust had grown where doubt once lived. Their engagement was simple, witnessed by friends from the cafe and neighbors from her street. Daniel's world expanded to include hers, and hers widened without losing its center. Together, they created programs that fed the hungry and honored veterans with dignity, not pity. Daniel returned to leadership with humility, and Aisha found her voice amplified, not overshadowed. Their story traveled far, but the truth remained quiet and steady. Years later, on an evening much like the first, they walked past the old bus stop. The awning had been repaired, the lights brighter. Aisha squeezed Daniel's hand and smiled. Kindness, she had learned, could change the course of lives, starting with a single meal offered without expectation.